You have to look at how you respond in life, because that's the way it's going to work in a story.
What's true in story is true in life. On this week's episode of You Are a Storyteller, Jesse and Bryan explain how to spot a story in real life.
I think sometimes, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be whatever method you're looking at, hero's journey. There's so many different, save the cat, that sometimes people go like, okay, cool. So Bryan, I guess you just stumbled on something that nobody had ever known before, and you've kind of cracked the nut on this new thing, and your process is something that no one's ever, noticed before, whatever. And it's easy to kind of think of this like guru type stuff. But one of the things I thought was interesting, not only in your book but in your classes, is you explain how there's nothing new about this,
right? And
any person can see it if they only look. Can you talk about like what you meant by that?
Well, every now and then, most people, I've been lucky who read the book, they like the book, and I get a nice review online or something on Amazon. But every now and then somebody doesn't like it, and one of the things they'll say is there's nothing new in the book. And what's interesting to me, because it's like, I'm not wrong, you're wrong. Now, I don't mean you have to like the book, right? But the idea that there's something new to say about storytelling is ridiculous. We're not talking about technology or anything like that. We're talking about an ancient form of communication. It's ancient. And so, and it's not less than because it's ancient, right? Mm-hmm. It's not, we can't fix it. We can't improve on it. It sort of evolved over time to be what it is. And so there's only a new way of maybe describing it or seeing it.
Right.
But there's nothing new happening. Technology, people are often fooled by technology.
Yeah.
So movies come along and maybe people think there's a different way to structure a story, but not really.
Right.
And now we're in this new media era where everybody thinks this has some impact on storytelling, but really it's just flourishes.
Yeah.
We can do it this way instead of that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
It might be a different way to like distribute it.
Right.
Right. Just we used to paint on caves, now we paint on canvas.
Right.
But really, like you talked about the idea of how to kind of look for and find stories in their natural habitat. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you mean by natural habitat?
Well, what I mean is that talking like this is the parent form of storytelling, right? That stories, writing down stories is only an artificial way of doing this, right?
Yeah.
Right? So that you can talk to people across space, you can talk to people across time, right? Because you've written it down.
Right.
Right? But really, this is the parent form. So any rules about storytelling, you can learn just from listening to people talk and tell stories in real life.
Yeah.
And the problem is that in real life, you think you're having a conversation and you don't think you're telling stories. And so you don't pay attention to the stories that are being told. And they become invisible. Mm-hmm. But storytelling is a natural human thing. That's why you can't fix it or improve it or whatever. It's like we do it naturally, and most of us do it well naturally.
What's funny about that, I was just talking to a friend of mine, Matt, actually, and I was trying to tell him about this. I was like, the guru thing is BS.
Right.
Go home tonight, don't say anything to your wife, and just watch. Mm-hmm. Just listen. But for the first time, listen for proposal, argument, conclusion. Listen for the point they're trying to make and how they make it. Right. And all of a sudden you'll go, oh, this is just how we communicate. And knowing how something works allows you to actually just do a better job of it because you're aware of it.
Right.
Whereas before, like you said, it was kind of invisible. And it was funny, as I was convincing him of it, I was like, actually, just listen to what I just said.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right? I told you at the beginning, I was like, a lot of times we think, blah, blah, and we do this, just go home tonight, argument, right, conclusion.
Right.
So, you know what I mean? And you just go like, it's just, we're naturally doing it all the time. One of the things I really like about that, Bryan, is it takes kind of the fallen star, there's just these magical people out there that know how to tell a story.
Right.
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 And it becomes something more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me some examples of like natural habitat stories, like that maybe people like, that didn't notice or something, like the sunscreen thing, or like, like give me some examples of like how people can start to look for this stuff.
Well, okay, so you'll hear often that stories need conflict, right? And the reason that stories need conflict is because conflict is the thing we need to learn how to survive. So stories are essentially about survival information, right?
Yeah.
So, okay, so I think I talk about this in Golden Theme, but so I moved to a neighborhood when I was a kid, new neighborhood, and there was a big hill, and during the winter when it snowed, people would sled down this hill. And when you got there as the new kid, it wasn't always sleds. It was inner tubes or whatever, plastic bags or those discs things or whatever. Yeah. It could be all kinds of things. But when you got there, the kids would tell you a story because you're the new kid. And they would tell you the story about a kid who was, I think, a generation older than we were. And he was sledding down the hill, hit a telephone pole, knocked the wind out of himself. Everybody gathered around. Are you okay? I'm fine. He went home. He wasn't feeling too well after a little while, went home and took a nap and never woke up because he had broken a rib and punctured an organ and was bleeding internally but didn't know it. And kids tell that story because it's kind of ooky and scary.
Yeah.
And they don't know why they're telling it.
Yeah.
But really, they're telling you how to survive, right? They're telling you, be careful, right? There's telephone poles here. Be careful. If you hit a telephone pole or something, you may be more hurt than you know.
Yeah.
Right? So don't go home and take a nap.
Yeah.
Make sure you get checked out and make sure you're okay.
Right.
So they're telling you how to survive. So any kid who then has an accident like that has an example of how not to behave.
Right.
And we do this without thinking about it. We do this without we'll just pass on survival information without even thinking that's what we're doing.
Right.
We just do it. We can't help but do it. And what's interesting about that story is, it demonstrates to the kids how to survive, but it also secondarily, as I'm telling you, demonstrates how people use stories to survive.
Yeah.
Right.
Double purpose, right?
Yeah.
But exactly right. But just that, what I love about that too is the empathy side of that. Mm-hmm. I think before we've talked about, if it's about imparting survival information, it's like a genuine service to someone, and our parents or grandparents would do it because they love us and they go, hey, we don't want you to go through this. But what's awesome is those kids, the way to kind of like, I don't know, bring you into the fold and be like, hey, there's a new kid.
Yeah.
It's just really cool that there's an empathy side of like, hey, we'll tell you a funny story, or just, hey, here's a story. But at the end of the day, you're like, wow, that's a real gift they're giving you. Right. Hey, we've seen what happens when you don't do this.
Right.
It also makes you feel closer. You understand the neighborhood better. Mm-hmm. Right. But I just love that there's empathy behind it as opposed to, I don't know, just like information.
Right.
Yes, they were giving information, but it's kind of the spirit behind it.
Right.
They didn't have to do. They could have just been like, hey, new kid.
Right.
Bring your own sled and go nuts on the hill and see if he hits something.
Right.
It's really cool. I was, what's funny is, here's another example of this in real life. I was in the car talking to our friend Callie,
mm-hmm.
right? And we were talking about this very thing. And minutes later, 2-3 minutes later, she was talking about, she's like, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what happened. And she's like, never use speakerphone. And I was like, okay. She's like, so Chris, I thought he was about to buy me a ring or something. She's like, I kind of felt like something was going on. And we're in the car. His phone rings. He doesn't recognize it. He puts it on speaker. And they go, hi, is this Chris? And he's like, it is. And he goes, just letting you know the ring just came in.
Oh.
And he was like, oh, hold on a second. And like put it on.
Right.
And she was like, oh, I just felt so bad for him because you could tell he was trying to save, being surprised and all that. And she's like, so like, don't use speakerphone. And I was like, Callie, remember the thing I told you about looking for stories in their natural habitat like 2 minutes ago?
Yeah.
You just did it.
Right.
And we're just like, and she was like, oh, great. I just told her that.
Right.
Wait a minute or two, completely forgot about it.
Yeah.
And then she just does it. And she follows.
She has a proposal.
It starts with, oh my God, never use speakerphone.
Right, yeah. She proves it, right? She argues her case, right? Uh-huh. And then she concludes,
That's
and
it.
So often it's a circle, right?
Yeah.
So often it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I'll never use a speakerphone.
I'll never use speakerphone.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
But it's really fun when you can start to pick those things out and start to see them. You start to go like, oh, cool, this is natural. If it's natural and I'm a person,
Right.
I can probably figure out how to do this a little bit better.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. The thing is, too, because now you notice it, you're internalizing it differently. And when you internalize it, the knowledge of it,
Yeah.
it's easier to reproduce. It's easier to reproduce.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you think that writing and story structure and story construction comes from some place that's not you,
Right.
you're going to have a hard time with it. Mm-hmm. Right? But if you
Yeah.
think, well, I already do this every day.
Yeah.
And if you've learned how to listen to other people doing it, you also don't feel, people are always worried about being preachy. If you see that people do teach each other things in the real world all the time, you're not so concerned with being preachy because you have something to say.
Yeah.
Right?
And all of those stories we talked about from the real world experience, whether it was Callie's story or whatever, even Matt's story explaining this or the sledding story, every one of them had a purpose.
Right.
And going back to your definition, we talked about in the last episode where, a story is just the telling or retelling of a series of events leading to a conclusion. You'll notice that each one of those stories had to land where they landed.
Right.
If all of a sudden you're like, yeah, and he bled to death.
Right.
So the point of my story is, don't ever go outside when it's snowing. You'd be
Right.
like, wait, what? What does that have to do with sledding? Or if Callie was like on the phone one, if she was like, so the point of that is, phones, am I right?
Right.
You'd be like, well, no, it has to go back to the voice.
Right.
Right. Can you talk about, in a similar way as like seeing things in their natural habitat? I remember you talked about seeing this in jokes, how you see how jokes are structured and they have to kind of move through this process.
Right.
If you want them to work.
Right. Well, people, they understand how jokes work in that. Now, there are people who say they can't tell jokes and, whatever. But people basically know how jokes work. Jokes are just little stories. And those kinds of jokes, those kind of story jokes, they're just little stories. Usually with a piece left out, right, for you to, right? But they're just little stories. And people have a hard time with first act, second act, third act, right? And when you're trying to teach it. But when they're telling a joke, they'll get into the middle of the second act and realize they didn't establish something in the first act. So they'll get to the middle and they'll go, oh, wait, the goat is wearing a party hat, right?
Yeah,
or whatever, right?
Yeah.
The penguin has a boombox,
Yeah,
whatever it is,
right.
And so because they know, oh, wait, this won't work because I didn't establish it in act one. Right? But for some reason, you make a movie or a short film or writing a screenplay and you say, look, you didn't establish this in the first act, and people want to argue with you. But they understand it in a joke.
Yeah.
So the same structure.
Let's put some, let's just kind of cut to the chase on this one. So like The Martian, right?
Okay.
As an example.
All right.
Just to make it easier for people.
All right.
I get we don't necessarily want to call things out. But like,
Yeah.
if you took the first act out of a joke, nothing's going to, you're like, okay,
Right.
so a goat party, how'd that set up?
Right.
Can you talk about that? Like, why do you think people are going away from the first act? If we know it doesn't work in a normal conversation,
Right.
and we know it doesn't work in examples like a joke, why do you think people think it works to not have a first act?
First of all, I think that, all right, I'm gonna say bad things about The Martian.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I just want to say, this is not the only culprit, and I don't know why it happened the way it did, and I know it made $1 billion, and so it doesn't matter what I say.
Yeah.
But, all I can tell you is this: I had some agents once who told me not to write a first act because they were like, just get right to it, and all I could think was, and without judging them, I mean, kind of, but I don't think they understood what a first act does, right? So people want to cut right to the chase. They want to get right to the good part, right? Get to the part where the thing happens, right?
Where Braveheart's in the fight. And you're like,
Right.
yeah, but the fight matters because we know about his wife.
Right.
We know what happened.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to know, you have to know that the goat has a party hat on, right? In order for the thing to work. And so they're asking me to, that's okay. And it's like, well, then it doesn't work. What happens is, and everybody has this experience now when they're watching things, where you see them happening in front of you. You're watching a movie and things happen, but you don't actually have an emotional response. So you don't have a real emotional response. You might go, oh, I bet that would be sad. Oh, right. Oh, I bet that would be scary. I bet that guy really wants to get home. Right. Yeah. Whatever. But you don't, you're not feeling it like you used to in like an older film.
Yeah.
You would feel it.
Well, like I'm going to science my way out of this thing or whatever.
Right.
And you're like, cool. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to see how someone survives.
Right.
But why do we care if he survives or not?
Yeah. So it kind of works in that it is all about surviving in this harsh environment. Right. But there's no deeper reason to tell the story. And that's a problem, I think.
Yeah.
And so
it's Castaway.
Castaway is the same. Yeah, right. So Castaway has the same. It's a guy all by himself, deserted someplace.
Yeah.
Castaway is the same thing as The Martian.
Yeah.
There's no difference.
Right.
Except Castaway has a brilliant first act. Mm-hmm. And if you watch that first act, you'll see. He gives a big speech about time right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And he says, we must never make the mistake of turning our back on time. A lot of times people will talk about that film and they'll go, boy, it's a big FedEx commercial at the beginning, not understanding that they needed something that was about expediency.
Yeah. They had to dramatize that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why not FedEx, right? Yeah. So you have this guy who's sort of ruled by time, but never makes time for his life.
Yeah.
He never makes time for his girlfriend, Kelly, and so the way that is structured is so amazing because like they even, when he does have time, they're at a Christmas, like a family Christmas gathering, Christmas Eve or Christmas night, whatever it is. And they're at this dinner, and during the dinner, a couple of things happen. During the dinner, somebody says, so when are you going to make an honest woman out of Kelly? I think her name's Kelly. When are you going to make an honest woman out of Kelly? And then they both go, oh, how long did that take? Right? Time again. How long did that take? Because that happens all the time. So they're joking about that. And so that happens. And then a little while later, Tom Hanks's pager goes off and he looks at her and she looks at him like, yeah, this is what happens. Right? They have a silent conversation. It's really great. They exchange sort of Christmas gifts in the car while he's at the airport.
Yeah.
He finally is going to make he gives her an engagement ring, right? He jokes at first and doesn't do it, but he gives her an engagement ring. And then says, I'll be right back. And of course he gets on the plane and he crashes. But the other thing that happens is she gives him a watch with her picture in it. It's like, right? So she's linked to time. The time he's not spending with her, right? She's linked to time in this first act. And so what he says is, oh, I'll keep this on Kelly time. No matter where I am, I'm on Kelly time, right? So when he's on this island by himself, that's one of his prized possessions. This is what keeps him alive. The thing he didn't have time for, right, is what keeps him alive. And so
it's unbelievable. The work that must have gone into that.
It's a brilliant first act. It's brilliant. So the difference between that and The Martian is, first thing, guy gets stuck on Mars. Mm-hmm. First thing, he pulls this I'm a botanist out of his butt. Like, we don't know what he is. Like, like, why? Who cares? Like, I don't care. Like, I guess if you like to look at Matt Damon and you think he's funny or whatever or charming, I guess that's enough. But if you don't, there's nothing for you.
Yeah.
There's no real story there. There are a bunch of things that happen.
Right.
He's stuck, but what's his life on Earth? Who is he? Mm-hmm. Does he, we barely know who he is.
Right.
He at one point in the second act, he's playing some music from one of his crewmates that he hates, but he has to tell us he hates it because we don't have a first act.
Yeah.
That tells us he hates it.
Right.
Right? What would be interesting is if we knew he hated it from the first act, he wouldn't have to say anything in the second act.
And then just like...
But he could love it in the second, because he's alone now.
Because he's alone. Yeah, now it gets more interesting.
Yeah. Right?
There's something to push off of.
Right. So what happens is, when there's no first act, there's a lot of talking about stuff they should have shown you in the first act.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Speeches which is
boring.
It is boring.
Because then it becomes preachy, because you're not dramatizing. You're not showing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it just feels like plot point, plot point, plot point.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know why they didn't have a first
But it
act.
feels like people go, but I want to get to the action. You're like, yeah, but the chasing and bullet matters.
Right.
Because of all the other 20... I mean, we run into this all the time, if we're working for a client or something, and they'll be like, it just took too long to get into their fill-in-the-blank cool thing, race car driving, whatever it is in the thing we're doing. And then you're like, yeah, but when you realize that she didn't have legs, that's why it matters when she gets in the race car and she wins the race.
Right.
So you just want her to win the race and not tell people what it took to get there?
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the cool part is that she won the race. You're like, no, the cool part is in spite of, you know what I'm saying? And so I get that that's the flash.
Right.
But the flash that you go like, oh man, so it's like.
It's the punchline.
Yeah, it's the punchline to go back to
punchlines aren't, I mean, some are, but mostly they're not funny all by themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'll give you an example. We were out to dinner the other night, and I told you one of my favorite jokes. Well, it's really a story, right? About Don Rickles.
Right.
And how Don Rickles was at a restaurant, and he had a gal that he wanted to impress. And, Don Rickles wasn't, nearly as famous as his buddy Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
And so they go over and they sit down at the table, and she's looking over, and he says, he tells her, like, hey, I know Frank Sinatra. And she's like, sure you do. And he leaves the table, and he goes over to Frank's table, and he says, hey, Frank, I'm with this girl. I'd really like to take her home. Is there any way you can swing by at some point and just say hi, give me a little cachet? Frank's like, yeah, sure, I'll make time. So when Frank finishes his dinner, he goes by the table and he goes, hey, Don, how you doing? And Don goes, Frank, do you mind I'm eating? It's one of my favorite stories.
Right.
Because it was so perfect for Don Rickles.
Right.
But there's an example of like, do you mind I'm eating? How is that funny by itself?
It's not.
But because of the context of like proposal, at this restaurant, doing this thing. Oh, Frank Sinatra, but like all of a sudden all of a sudden the whole place comes unglued on Carson or wherever he told the joke.
Yeah.
With just a line as simple as, you mind I'm eating?
Right. Right.
So that's why it matters.
Well, yeah.
But what other ending to that story could there have been?
Right.
Like imagine if he's like, oh, and Frank never came over. He'd be like,
right. There's no.
Why'd you tell me that's?
Yeah, there's no reason to tell that story.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why it's perfect. It's perfect like an improv. Mm-hmm. The funniest stuff in improv is always the thing where it's like, well, then open the door. Or whatever. And the guy who's not trying to be funny.
Right.
Who's just trying to finish the thought.
Right.
Right. And that was the logical, I really can't think of another ending to that Frank Sinatra story other than like, well, he never came over. And you're like,
right.
Oh, okay, that's too bad your friend didn't help you out.
Or he came over and she was impressed. And,
You're like, okay.
Yeah.
It has to be like you'll have an exercise where you'll show a joke and it'll have a bunch of different punchlines and you're like, you pick the one.
Right.
And it's always so clear. Like, well, it has to be this ending for it to be funny.
Right. Because everything is leading to it. Everything's contributing to that ending.
Yeah.
Right. So, So going back to The Martian.
Yeah.
What's contributing to that ending? Like why tell that story? Like there's a thing at the end where you see Matt Damon's character in a classroom. And he's talking about how you survive. And he says, you do it by solving one problem and then the next problem and the next problem. And I thought, why isn't this the beginning?
Totally.
Right. Why move it to the beginning.
Okay. Now I need you to prove that.
Now I know why I'm watching. It's like what I say about mood in my classes. Like, there are people who talk about writing or films and they go, well, it's about mood. It's a mood piece, right? Talk about mood.
What does that mean?
It means that sometimes people like things because they're dark or because they're creepy or because they're contemplative or because, you know what I mean? I like quiet, boring, long, whatever. You know what I mean?
I love those movies.
Yeah, I like that,
Yeah.
And that's fine, but those aren't stories.
Yeah.
And you can argue and say they are, but here's the deal. If I say to you, I have something to tell you. If I walk up to you and I say, Jesse, I have something to tell you. Clear blue sky. Hot sand beneath my toes. A nice warm breeze. Gulls calling in the distance. Okay, I'll see you later.
And they go, are you okay?
You'd be like, you didn't tell me anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But if I tell you why I'm telling you, if I say, Jesse, my trip to Mexico was amazing.
Yeah.
And then tell you all the same things.
Yeah. Clear blue sky.
Yeah.
Warm sand under my toes.
All of a sudden it matters.
That sounds like a great trip.
Yeah. Right? That's my point, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I had a great trip. Listen,
Yeah.
Oh, that proves your point.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right. Yeah. So to not have that,
right.
the reason to tell the story, they did a study. I don't know if I talked about this last time, but they did a study where they told, I can't remember who did it, some university, I think, but they had people read short stories. And
I've never heard you talk about that.
Oh, really?
No.
I think I blogged about it at some point, because what happened was I read this and I was like, duh. And I sent it out to a bunch of friends and they were like, why? What do you mean, duh? Like, it was news to them, but it wasn't news to me. So what happened was they had some students read short stories and they told some people what the ending was, or they let them read the ending first or something. And then the other group, not. It was a big surprise, whatever the ending was. The people who knew the ending were more satisfied with the story and enjoyed it more.
Really?
Yeah. Because they knew why they were reading it.
Yeah. In order to survive, you got to take on one problem at a time. Or whatever.
Yeah.
You're like, oh.
Yeah. And so now you read differently.
Right. But I would think, here's I think the argument to that, like the whole story thing is like, yeah, but how much cooler is it to make the audience wait 2.5 hours to find out what the point of a movie is?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm saying I think that'd be, because at the end then they'll be like, oh, that's why I sat here the whole time.
Right.
I'm just saying I think that would be the argument, as opposed to if you let them in at the beginning. I don't know. I'm just saying I could see people saying that, just like in this, like Sixth Sense or something, where it's like, but it's so cool at the end when you realize the whole time or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think there's a lot of people out there that go like, yeah, I like not knowing until the last second of the movie.
Yeah, that makes sense if you think it's about your brain instead of your heart or your gut.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're doing a brain exercise, right? Again, if people talk to me about some show or something like, you never know what's going to happen and blah, 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 that's all head stuff.
Yeah.
They're not talking about anything. They don't feel anything.
Yeah.
Right? So they're not talking about what they feel. They talk about what they think. I thought this, but then this. I thought this, and then that. Right? They're not feeling anything. In Vertigo, Hitchcock's movie.
Yeah.
So in Vertigo, first of all, if people are watching or listening and they don't know Vertigo, you should know that. But so in Vertigo, Jimmy Stewart is he was in love with a woman who died. This is you'll see the movie, but he's in love with a woman who died, and he meets another woman who looks like the woman, and so he starts to remake her into this dead woman and make her in her image, like, oh, dye your hair and all this stuff, so, or bleach your hair and all this stuff, so dress like her. He starts to remake her. Now in the book you find out at the ending that they are the same person. That's
really so the book is different, structured different.
That's the big reveal. But in the movie, Hitchcock said, no, you're going to find out in the middle that they're the same.
That's crazy. It's at the end in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. And
that guy was too smart.
Yeah, and everybody told him he was crazy. No, that's the big surprise. That's the big surprise. You got to do it at the ending. That's the big surprise. But he said, look, if you find out in the middle, but he doesn't know, now this is an emotional thing.
Yeah.
Now you're going, oh my God, what's going to happen when he finds out? He's
yeah.
going to find out. He's going to, right? Now you get both things, right? You got to keep it a secret for a little while. You got to reveal it. And now you have the other part where it's all about the emotions. What's going to happen?
Well, here's the crazy part. Going back to the joke exercise. No, but here's the cool part. He never finds out.
Right.
And you're like, yeah, okay, but why?
Right.
He has to find out.
Right.
No. The audience is going to think you're going to find out. But what's going to be cool is you're never going to find out. And Jimmy Stewart just goes on with his life.
Yeah.
You'd be like, well, that's stupid. In the same way, the joke doesn't make any sense. Well, what happened? Well, Frank never came over to the table.
Right.
Why the hell did you made me sit through that and he never even finds out?
Yeah.
If you apply this logic to anything else in life, you're usually like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like, he's got to find out.
Right.
And what happens when he finds out? Now I'm got a reason to sit there for another half of the movie. I just think that's crazy that the guy like Hitch. Again, the funny thing about the masters is just do what they say.
Right.
You can be like, but I'm a delicate flower. I'm my own person. It's like,
yeah.
No. Just do what they say, and all of a sudden you go, like, oh, well, there's a reason why he did that.
Right. Well, this is another example of natural habitat. So Hitchcock said that he never created suspense by keeping a secret. He creates suspense by telling people everything. And he said he learned it when he was in school. When he was going to school in whatever they call elementary school in England, I think it's primary school, I think they call it, whatever they call it. So he was in school. And if you got in trouble, you would have to go to see the principal. And the principal had this big paddle. And you would be paddled. But you go to see the principal and he'd say, what did you do? It's like, you talk back to the teacher or whatever. And he goes, okay, Mr. Hitchcock gets 5 swats for that or whatever. So you'd write it down in the book. That would happen at the beginning of the day. You don't get your swats then. You get your swats at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's torture.
Right. And Hitchcock's like, oh, I see. Letting me know what was going to happen is what created the suspense. It's all I could think about all day.
Yeah.
And that's where he learned about suspense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You have to look at how you respond in life because that's the way it's going to work in a story.
And for those of you paying attention at home, what Bryan just did is exactly what we'd be trying to explain the entire show. It wasn't like you were structuring that. You were like, here, I'll give you an example. So Hitchcock and blah, blah, blah. It's like what you just did was you just followed that.
Yeah.
And you're like, and that's how we learned this, and that's why, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all we're trying to say is as you're listening to us, as soon as you turn this thing off, go listen to a friend talk, listen to your mom talk, listen to whoever talk, and hopefully you'll go, oh, that's it.
Right.
And if you can start to build on these little bits of information, the net should be you'll become a better storyteller and communicator.
Yeah.
Right?
I think so. Yeah. It's natural, and when you realize that, it changes how you approach it.
Perfect. I didn't know he changed that from the book.
Yeah.
God, how did you? Some of these people, man, like
I know, I know.
Because I'm assuming it was a hit book.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah.
You imagine somebody gives you here, Bryan, here's the biggest thriller, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
Just make this, and you're like, no, I'm gonna change it.
Well, The Martian was a hit book. I would have changed it.
Yeah, well, but I just love that he was just like he knew better, and so he was like, no, this goes here.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, there you go. Now it works.
right. But he was, he talked about how he didn't make whodunits because whodunits were head things.
Yeah.
Right. It's funny. People will often say to me about a movie that they don't, it insults their intelligence. I didn't like that. It insults my intelligence. It's like, that's interesting that you think this is about your intelligence, right? We're talking about the dramatic form. And drama is about comedy and tragedy, right? That's drama. Comedy is also drama, right? So the logo, right, that the Greeks used are the masks of comedy and tragedy, right, to indicate drama. They did not have a thinker. They had philosophy, right?
They were famous the worst for their mask in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they had philosophy, right? So they could have incorporated that into the piece, but they understood that drama served a different function, right? So they would say to the audience, the chorus might say, weep with the hero, right?
And they're directing you to do that.
Right. Yeah, weep with the hero. We want you to, because that catharsis is good for you. Those feelings are good for you.
Yeah.
We've decided, no, thinking is better.
Yeah.
And, but that's not true. It's not better. It's another thing, right? And the best use of drama, it was designed to be emotional.
Yeah.
It was designed that way. You're using it incorrectly if you're making it about thinking. And so when somebody says it insults my intelligence, it's like, I don't understand why you think this is about your intelligence.
Yeah. You picked the wrong lane.
Yeah.
Yeah, go read a philosophy or something.
Yeah.
And if you look at even culturally right now, the movie I hear everyone talking about that I haven't gotten to see yet is about Mr. Rogers. And Mr. Rogers was one of my heroes.
Yeah.
As a kid, it's how my mom would measure time. So if we're driving from like Seattle to Eugene, where my family's from, you're sitting in the car and you're always going like, how long is it? Well, when you're a little kid, you don't know time. So if someone says 45 minutes, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
So if it's like, yeah, we're an hour away, my mom would always be like, it's 2 Mr. Rogers.
Okay.
Like Mr. Rogers is a big deal. Right. And the funny thing is everybody, what do they say? Bring Kleenex. It was one of our, I don't remember who it was in the office the other day was saying, yeah, when you walk into the theater, there's like a basket of tissues. I'd never seen that before. Like of little things. And everyone in there is crying.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, I looked around, it was packed. And and they're like, it's this huge hit.
Yeah.
And it's like, people know going into it, it's going to connect with you emotionally. Also, I need to see it to verify this, but the person is obviously familiar with an armature and all that.
Right.
And they were saying like, oh, it's at the very beginning, and it's around like love and like how love transforms.
It is.
Something
It's a
like
good
that.
movie.
Oh, you've seen it?
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
But I mean, the idea of like, whoever made that knew this wasn't an intellectual. Sit down. I'm going to explain to you why Mr. Rogers was awesome, and I'm going to use logic
Right.
the whole way through. And I did my job. If you walk out and intellectually you go, oh, the process Mr. Rogers used was very effective.
Right.
The reason people are going to the movie is because they want to cry and go like, yeah, what happened?
Yeah. They're moved.
They're moved, and whoever made the film had the kind of understood the form.
Right. Yeah. There's nothing wrong. I don't understand why it became wrong to move people. Now, sometimes people attempt to move people and they fail.
Yeah.
And they're ridiculed for that in a way that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Because there often there's the other camp, right, who makes it all about thought, makes it all about your brain, but they often make something very confusing and unclear.
Yeah.
And they are never criticized for that. When it's confusing and unclear, people blame themselves, not the storyteller.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Everybody makes mistakes, right? You can do your best, but you can make a mistake. So, yeah, they were unclear. But here's the thing. Being unclear is easy. Anybody can be unclear.
Right.
So it's interesting to me that people go, oh, that was really clear. Like, it's hard to be clear.
Yeah.
So it's a really strange thing. I've never understood the craft of confusing an audience.
That's right. But
anybody can do it. It takes no training.
Look at it. Well, like I told you, I have the whole collection of all of Dr. King's speeches, and like the beauty of it was there'd be other doctors in the room, there'd be little kids, there'd be people of, educated, non-educated, rich, poor, whatever. Everybody knew what he was talking about.
Right.
And he was incredible because he knew how to move the entire room.
Right.
Churchill could do that. Like there's these speakers that and you would leave and you'd be like, I got it. I get it. They clearly communicated in a way that helped me get on board and take action towards whatever, fighting the Germans in World War II or, whatever it was. And so the funny thing is when it comes to film specifically, it gets weird where it's like, man, I don't know what the hell that was about.
Right.
Or does anybody know? And everybody's like, oh, man, I don't know. Well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
The funny thing is, like, I think you've even mentioned before about how, like, where people aren't ashamed to do this is kids' movies.
Right.
And then you wonder why kids' movies are such big hits.
Right.
Like, everybody always goes to the new Pixar movie or whatever.
Right.
Right? And it
because they're all about clarity and they're all about moving you.
And who doesn't like them?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like everybody likes Finding Nemo. Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Right? They're moved.
Yeah.
Up. That beginning of Up, they're moved.
Yeah.
Right?
But they were trying to do that.
Right.
They were like, hey, we're making a movie. We want to move you. We're going to use music and audio and visual and all these things to try to move the audience and not just, I don't know, lecture at them or something like that. Yes, that's weird. I would love to know when that happened. Because even when we talk about like Capra, the Capricorn.
Yeah, they called it Capricorn.
And that's really lame because, I reading his biography and looking at his body of work, it's like, what was everybody talking about?
Well,
It's a Wonderful Life, no bullshit. That movie, if you sit down and watch that movie, it's incredible. Like it wrecks me every
it's amazing.
year. I watch it at Christmas. I'm always like, the rest of the family, I got little kids, they'll be like bored. And I'll just be like, how the hell did he do this?
There's some beautiful work in that
Oh
movie.
my
It's
God.
off the charts. But there's also it gets very dark. So it's interesting that people don't take that away from it because that's not the point of it, right?
Dude, the guy commits suicide.
The guy, he tries. He's attempting to commit suicide. But also, there's Mr. Gower who slaps George around. If you remember, George is a kid.
Yeah.
And he slaps him around in his bad ear and makes his ear bleed.
Yeah.
Right? That's how dark it gets.
Yeah.
Right? And Mr. Gower is upset because his son died and he got drunk and he slapped that.
And he was going to poison the woman.
Yeah. So it gets dark. It's not always light. It's just, it ends on a light note. And so people, people they forget about the dark.
Yeah.
But he got as dark as anybody. He got, I mean.
Yeah, but it sucks because I think people go like Capricorn and they're like, yeah, but here's the thing. Before people are old enough to know they're not supposed to be moved.
Yeah.
Watch that movie with like if I watched that even with like my 10-year-old, right? They would be like, wow, I've never seen this before. This is really interesting to me. Like they didn't know. Now if it comes on, I think people go like, oh, I can't even give it a chance.
Right.
Because it's supposedly cheesy or whatever.
Yeah.
If you actually just sit down and give it a chance, I think you'll find that it moves you more than 90% of the stuff you see now.
Yeah.
Like that movie's bonkers. Like
No,
I get the pacing stuff. It was old, black and white, whatever. Man, when he comes running through that town, what's a better, when he comes in the house, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's nuts.
But there's also very real things in there about not having money.
Yeah.
And not having the life you dreamed of having.
Yeah.
And in a raw, very real way.
And who hasn't felt like that at one point or another?
Yeah, in a very real way.
Yeah.
Like, no, I'm disappointed. I had plans.
Yeah.
Right? I was going to do this. I was going to do that.
Right.
And I'm stuck in this old drafty house.
Yep.
You know, with kids that, you know, I might go to jail now. You know, like it's bad.
Yeah.
And it's not
and you think
sugar-coated.
so drafty, kids are even getting sick.
Yeah. It's not sugar-coated.
Yeah.
You know? And he's got to watch his friends like Wainwright go succeed, and you know, it's a serious movie.
Yeah,
you know,
but that's why when all the dark side and the sadness and the tricky part and seeing your friends succeed and like he could have invested in that, you know, I'll get you into the bottom or whatever. When it comes back around and everybody starts pooling the money and all these folks come around him and you see that like he didn't waste his life.
Right.
You know, all of a sudden it just breaks you because it's like, it's honest and it's great.
Yeah.
So people would have left that theater like Mr. Rogers and I'm sure they'd be, you know, wiping a tear away or something, or just been like glad to be alive again, you know? And you walk away and he did his job.
Right.
Katie and I, you know, we went and saw Steve Martin Short last weekend and it was so funny because when we walked into the theater, there was some stuff going on, and we were just like, oh, man, this is a bummer, whatever. We walked out, and it was like, that was a gift. Right. It was a gift because by the time we left, we're like, I'm not worried about all that stuff anymore.
Right.
And they moved us emotionally. We laughed. We had a great time. You know, and so by the time you walk away, you go like, they did their job. Can you imagine any other thing other than movies? I went to a comedy club. What was great about it? I learned a lot.
Right.
You're like, was it funny? You're like, well, no.
Right.
But I sure learned a lot.
Right.
And you'd be like, no, but it's the point of going to the theaters to be moved.
Right.
It's just funky. There's all these weird rules that apply to everything else except for film for some reason. Yeah. And I don't understand it.
I don't either. I think some of it is how it's been written about.
Huh. What is it? What does that mean?
Well, how critics talk about it. Like how critics, you know, critics come from a literary perspective often. They don't really understand drama often.
What do you mean by understand? What do you think that's not understood?
Well, they often talk about smart movies, right? They often, you know, I'm not a big fan of critics. Padachevsky didn't like them either. He is interesting what he said about them, but you know, he said somebody reviewed one of his movies and said that it tied up nicely and it was too tied up at the end, and it resolved so nicely. And he said, well, that's the point of drama. It's supposed to resolve, right? It's supposed to take all these like things in life that seem random, right, and then give it meaning. He said that the point of it is to resolve. Like, you don't even understand that.
Yeah.
You don't. That's the point of it.
Yeah.
So often I find they don't understand that. I knew a critic not very well, and I was trying to get her to come to my classes to learn something about how stories worked, and she resisted, would never come. And I don't think they want to know that. I think it's often it's about them and how smart they are.
Yeah. Improving it.
Yeah.
But just because it resolves doesn't mean it's boring. Like I told you, I read the Predator comic you did, right? Mm-hmm. And like I told you after I read it, I was like, dude, I didn't even see the ending coming. And you told me exactly what had to happen in the story in the first act.
Right.
And it's funny, I was just reading it and enjoying the story. And then when the way you ended the comic, I was like, damn it, I didn't even see that coming. And you had told me at the beginning of the comic exactly what was going to happen. And because I was just reading.
Right.
I was just in the story.
Right.
It didn't ever feel like you put a ribbon on or anything. And also, once I saw the ending, I was like, well, yeah, it's got to end that way. How else could it end?
Right, right.
But I never felt dumb or because I didn't see what you were doing. I never felt cheated by it or talked down to or anything. I was just like, oh yeah, that's how the story has to end.
Right.
Just like how the joke has to end. Oh, of course Frank has to come over.
Right.
It's Don Rickles also. There's some context.
Right.
But you know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, the joke's got to end like that. So it's got to be like, boom, boom, boom. Yeah. And once you see it in life, right, hopefully you can start to see it in movies. And that's why maybe, you know, the biggest bummer about all this stuff, Bryan, is the more you learn about this stuff, all of a sudden you start watching movies you used to love and you start to go like, oh, dang it.
Yeah, that's what happens.
That's kind of a bummer.
Happens to everybody.
But other than that, it's worth learning regardless because at least you can do it a little better.
Well, the other thing that happens, two things. You lose the stuff that's not as good because you don't like it as much. Yeah. You're like, oh, man, I wish. Yeah. Right? But the stuff you appreciate, you appreciate it like up here.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? It's different. Yeah. It's like, oh, I see. Yeah. This is special.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like searching for Bobby Fischer or something like that.
Bobby Fischer's amazing.
You see, they got me a signed script for my birthday.
Oh, they did?
Andy did. Yeah, you got it too. It's amazing. And I was looking, I was like, this is incredible because this is special now.
Right.
Because the movie's so crazy.
It's amazing.
But I never saw it when it came out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But like now you watch it and you can see like that scene where you always point out where he like picks up the phone books and he drops them on the floor. And you're just like, oh my God. Who did like this is so well done. It's kind of unbelievable.
It is.
But that's exactly right. Yeah, sure. You lose some of the stuff. Doesn't mean you still can't enjoy it and be like, I appreciate what people are doing.
Right.
But man, when you see it done well, you don't forget. Well, you literally don't forget it.
You don't forget it, and it's a different. You know, it's I don't know if I told you about my friend Bryan O'Connell. He's an illustrator, and he's at Pixar now, but. When we were starting out, Starbucks used to have these mugs that had like paintings by masters on them, and I had a Van Gogh one, and he was over at my house and we were having tea or coffee or something, and he looked at this Van Gogh. Now I don't paint, right? I take pictures, but I don't paint. So he looked at this Van Gogh and he went to another place and he kind of was joking, but he was serious and he sort of pet the mug and he was like, pretty picture. Yeah. And I knew that I couldn't see what he saw because I wasn't a practitioner of that craft, that I could look at it and appreciate it. But there's a level at which I could never appreciate it because I don't understand the process the same way.
How difficult.
Yeah, or what he was seeing. I can't even tell you exactly what he was seeing, right? It may be beyond my perception. I may have to start putting paint on canvas to even start to understand exactly
what that guy could do.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's the way it is when you start learning this stuff, when you're looking at, I know that there's a level that sometimes I appreciate things or sometimes dislike things on a level that people don't understand. And I don't mean that. That's not an insult to them. They're not practitioners of it. They haven't studied it.
You've been painting longer. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like a musician. You know, musicians know when another musician is really good.
Yeah.
And they're not impressed with the same things that a layperson would be impressed with.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. You know?
But just like that, your friend who's an illustrator, designer, can look at that painting and go like, do you have any idea what he did with that? And you'd be like, oh, I thought it was beautiful. That's why I picked it up.
Right.
And he's like, no. Like, can you see what that he did? That's how I feel like about that scene where you were talking. You always, walk through on Searching for Bobby Fischer, where you're like, when you see it and you realize how hard that is, you're just kind of like, how did you do that?
Right.
Right. Or even just all of these classics we always talk about.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, when you realize, just as a starting point, like the Van Gogh thing, well, you start by how? Well, you get some paint, or you can just put paint on your finger. And you start somewhere and just build and build and build, and then hopefully, if you really care about it and you keep learning about it, you'll be like your friend, and it goes, man, do you know what he did? Can you see this?
Yeah.
And it's funny how when it comes to story, what's the starting point? Just listen.
Right.
Just listen.
Yeah.
Listen to the person next to you on the bus.
Right.
And listen to whoever's, at the house tonight. And, and listen to whoever. And all of a sudden you sort of go like, oh, this is in us.
Right.
all of us, we're all the same. We can all do this.
Yes.
And once you start to identify it, then you go like, okay, I'm going to stop painting with my finger. Now I'm going to get a brush.
Right.
And over time, I'm not saying you're going to be Van Gogh. Like there's only, but boy, you can get way closer than you might think.
I think that's true.
If you just start by listening to how people talk.
Well, the difference is being process oriented versus goal oriented. Right. So if you're process oriented, then you do that. You start with the finger paint, you work your way.
Yeah.
You just, you fall in love with the process. If you're goal oriented, all you do is you paint and you get upset because it's not like Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, I tried to paint and it wasn't like Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
Right. I was giving a lecture and there was a student in the class and he was sort of sketching as I was talking. And at one point he scribbled out his sketch. And I told him, don't do that. I could tell he was goal oriented, right? That sketch doesn't matter, right? That sketch only gets him to a good place later. That sketch doesn't have to be a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And if he scratches it out, what he's saying is, oh man, it's not a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, well, no, it's not going to be. Just keep drawing.
Yeah.
Right? Just keep trying to get better.
Yeah. And the cool thing is, hopefully someday, you'll be looking through that and you'll go, you know what? That wasn't even as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah.
And I think there's a magic to that. Like normally when we put out something, doc or whatever, I'll be talking to Andy or whoever, but I'll be like, oh man, I don't know. I guess we got to put it out. It's usually a couple years later, I'll watch and be like, you know what? I was way too hard on myself.
Yeah.
That's better than I remembered.
Yeah.
Or something like that. And at least you can appreciate that, you're progressing or whatever.
Yeah.
But you're right. It's like, don't be ashamed of it.
Right. You can't be ashamed of the process.
Yeah.
Right? The process is what it is.
Yeah.
And it's embracing the process. Process will get you to a goal.
Right.
But thinking about the goal is not going to help your process.
Yeah, it's too hard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like what I used to do when I had one of these little handy cams back when there's like mini DV, right? When you actually had like some form of tape.
Yeah.
And I would go out on the weekends and I would shoot. It'd just be like with my girlfriend or whatever. I'd watch a bunch of Truffaut movies and I'd be like, I'm going to just go shoot something the way I think Truffaut would do it. Mm-hmm. And then the next week I'd be like, I'm going to shoot something the way I think Kubrick would do it or whatever. I was just trying to feel it.
Right.
And none of it ever looked like that.
That doesn't matter.
I just wanted to feel like what it was like. I think Hunter S. Thompson sat down and wrote Great Expectations or Great Gatsby, I think. He sat down, he's like, I wrote it word for word.
Yeah.
When I was starting, he's like, I just want to know what it felt like.
Yeah. Hemingway did that with Huckleberry Finn.
Really?
Yeah.
But he's like, I just want to know what it feels like.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It's like, this is just part of the process.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be, you don't scribble it out. You'll be like, oh, I just did that. I just want to know that, just to start thinking, and eventually you find your own thing. But yeah, I just love that there's no magic key.
No.
Other than it's like, well, just be observant.
Right, yeah.
And then once you realize that you can once you can hear it, then you can start to see how you can do it.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. If you can't see it, you can't do it. You can learn to feel it. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's really the place you want to be, where you feel it. An audience can feel it, right?
Yeah.
So an audience understands story structure because everybody has had the experience of watching a movie and thinking, oh, that's the ending, because the shape of it tells them it's the ending, right? But then it goes on for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And they go, this movie's too long.
Yeah.
Because they understood the shape. They felt it. They don't know. They're not trained.
Yeah.
They felt it.
Because they've had conversations before.
Right.
Yeah.
And they knew that was where that was supposed to end.
Yeah.
And it didn't. And that's the point when people start going, that's too long.
Don Rickles. Yeah. So Frank comes over and he says, hey, how you doing? I said, Frank, do you mind reading? Anyways, we had a good laugh. And after that, I ate lamb chops and we had a couple drinks. And then later on that night, we ended up going for a nice walk. And super nice gal. I ended up talking to her a couple. You'd be like,
yeah.
Oh, dude, you ruined the joke. We all just wanted to take a second and laugh. And then,
yeah.
You see what I mean? Like, everybody knew. If you look it up, YouTube, that joke, Don Rickles, watch from a timing perspective. I mean, the guy knew exactly. He was like, boom.
Right.
You know what I mean? He knew that's the end. The movie's over. Walk out. It's over.
Yeah.
He could feel it, and I think it's great about that is you go like, this is a natural thing. Mm-hmm. It's all around you. When you see it, it'll help you get better. But the trick is knowing, like, trusting your gut. I think on that, like, you weren't dumb when you went to the movie and you said like, man, I feel like it should end it 20 minutes ago.
Right.
And then the person with you goes like, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Oh, we must not have gotten it. No, there probably just wasn't. They probably just didn't finish it for some reason.
Yeah. It's an interesting that people really do blame themselves, especially when something is a smart movie or an intellectual movie, or it's made by somebody that everybody proclaims as a genius. People will blame themselves for not understanding it, or for feeling like it was long or slow or boring, instead of blaming that storyteller.
Yeah.
Like, why not?
Yeah.
But if it's...
And it's like you said, it's okay if they made a mistake. You're just like, hey, we're all learning. That's fine.
Yeah. But when it's emotional, people are quick to say, that guy tried to make me feel something.
Yeah.
I don't know where that came from and why that's a thing. But people really get their backs up about it.
Yeah. Well, it's safer.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's way safer. When you actually try to move someone emotionally, it's either going to work or it's not.
Right.
When you're trying to, I don't know, engage with somebody intellectually, it's like, yeah, you can kind of work. Yeah, I kind of caught some of it.
Right.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. And it's easier to, it's harder to fail, right? And so people can be like, they didn't get my thing. The audience didn't get me. They don't get me. That's easy. That's so easy.
Yeah.
And never blame yourself.
Yeah.
That's so easy.
The beauty is if you can go, well, that didn't work. That's okay. What'd I do wrong?
Right.
Get somebody to help you. Oh man, for sure. Like, talk to some people and go like, yeah, it was too long, or you never really, this didn't work, or the fulcrum was, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
And then the cool thing is next time it can be better.
Right.
Or you can kind of try to find your little mountaintop to sit on and you don't get better.
Right.
Like, man, like when you listen to Coppola, I remember I saw Coppola do this thing with Robert Rodriguez on Robert Rodriguez's like director's interview show he had. And Coppola was like, talking about how much he appreciated Rob Rodriguez having him over to his house years ago and showing him all this cool new digital stuff he was working with. And Rob Rodriguez was like, yeah, but thanks for coming over. Are you kidding me? What do I have to teach you? And he was like, no. He's like, I'm just a student like you.
Yeah.
And, and I'm looking at him going like, that's what I hope I'm like.
Right.
I hope that hope I'm like Coppola. But what I mean by that is like, I hope at his age, I'm still going like, what are you talking about?
I told you, the story with August Wilson and me, right? Where August. So I knew August pretty well. And August was talking to me about story structure stuff.
How'd you meet him?
I met him on the street one day.
No kidding.
Yeah. And I recognized him and started talking to him. And then we talked more over the years. And,
wait, hold on. How'd you talk more over the years?
Well,
it's not like, we're talking about, he's a big deal.
He's a big deal. He's a big deal.
Like, did he give you your phone number or something?
He gave me his phone number the first time I met him.
No kidding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And I had that piece of paper forever. That's August Wilson with his number on it.
Yeah.
But there was a point at which I was seeing him almost every day. And I was like, I don't need this. And I threw it away. And then he got sick and he died. And I was like, I
had it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And so what'd you say? Like, what did you want to talk to him about a play or something? Like,
well, I just thought, here's a guy who does what I do essentially, and on some, plays movies, but and he's here. We lived in the same neighborhood essentially, so I saw him all the time. And so,
was he nice?
He was a very nice guy.
That's awesome.
He was a very nice guy. Yeah, he was a cool dude. So, yeah, he would.
I can see him being a cool dude.
He was a cool dude. He was a really down to earth, really down to earth guy.
Wow.
You wouldn't have any idea he understood who he was.
Yeah.
But he didn't define himself that way.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah, he was a cool guy. But anyway, so August was talking to me one day about story structure. August loved Invisible Ink. He read the manuscript before it was published.
No kidding.
Yeah, and he loved it. He said it was helping him with his last play that he was writing as he was dying. But he would occasionally, I remember once I was on the phone and he was walking by, and he stopped and waited for me to get off the phone because he wanted to ask my advice on something he was writing, which was like unbelievably flattering.
Yeah. And you're like, I'm wrapping it up.
Yeah. So I got off the phone and I talked to him, but he said to me one day, he goes, hey man, I should take your class. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? I go,
no way.
Yeah, he did. He goes, I should take your class. And I'm like, August, I think he has 2 Pulitzers. I'm like, August, you have 2 Pulitzers and I have 0 Pulitzers. And he said, I knew a guy once, who knew John Coltrane. And
Of course he did.
Yeah. He said, I knew a guy who knew John Coltrane, and he introduced somebody to John Coltrane. This guy was a saxophone player. The other guy was a saxophone player as well. And he says, John, I don't know what the guy's name was, but he says to John Coltrane, hey, John Coltrane, this is Jimmy something, whatever.
Yeah.
And he goes, Jimmy, and John Coltrane, and he says to John Coltrane, hey, Jimmy's a saxophone player too. And John Coltrane said, oh yeah? What can you teach me?
Of course he said that.
Yeah.
John Coltrane said that.
Yeah. And that's what August.
And August was like, nope, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's crazy. He has to take a class. I love that.
I know.
But that's what I'm talking about. Like, guys like that will only get better.
Yeah.
John Coltrane is who he is. August is who he is.
Yeah.
Coppola is who he is. And I just love that they're all like, towards the end of their lives, they're still like, oh, you got a class?
Yeah.
Oh, I got something to learn?
Yeah.
The hubris, man. Like, I think it's really easy to go like, in order to be an artist, I got to be an asshole and I got to feel like I got to know everything.
Right.
And then you look at people who are really good and they're like, oh, what can you teach me about how to play sax? And you're like, well, Mr. Coltrane, I don't think I could teach you anything, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was like after, I love Finding Nemo. It's still my favorite Pixar movie.
Yeah.
And it was Andrew Stanton who asked me to come speak at Pixar. And I was there 6 weeks. I taught, the first time I was there, I taught a class for 6 weeks.
Hold on a second. How'd you meet Andrew Stanton? How did that happen?
Well, we'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
But he I'm impressed with him, right? So,
yeah.
And, he says, yeah, you should be down here teaching classes. And then the next thing I know, I was down there teaching classes, and he sat in all of my classes. And I was like, this guy, he wrote and directed Finding Nemo. Like, I don't know what, but he was doing that Coltrane, August Wilson thing. Where he's
That's
like,
crazy.
that guy can teach me something.
It's just funny because you're just like, yeah, well, Andrew Stanton. It's like, yeah, but how do you guys... Like, how do you come? Like, I mean, the fact that how'd you even? Meet?
When Invisible Ink was a manuscript, it took 6 years to get the book published. So it was a manuscript for a long time, just sitting around. Nobody wanted it, So a bunch of writers read it, and I would give it out.
So August read it.
Andrew Stanton read it. So I had a friend who's his name's Derek Thompson, and he's a storyboard artist at Pixar. And I've known Derek a long, long time. I've known Derek since he was a teenager. I've known Derek forever. And so Derek was like, oh, I want to read your book. So he read it. He goes, I really like your book. He was working on, he didn't tell me what movie he was working on, but he was working on WALL-E. So he says, but he couldn't say what it was. And he goes, I'm working on Andrew's movie, and I think this would be really helpful. Can I show this to Andrew? I'm like, yeah, okay. So he printed it out, and he put it in Andrew's little mailbox there. And Andrew had just had a screening of WALL-E, within the company, and I guess it hadn't gone too well. So he wrote me later and told me this. But so what happened was he saw the manuscript. He knew that Derek had printed it out or something, and he saw it in his mailbox, and he goes, well, I'll take it with me, because he was going to go away for a few days and try to work out his story problems on this new movie. So he wrote me and he says, so I thought I would just kind of flip through it, but I read it all in one sitting. I just sat down and I read the whole thing cover to cover, and it helped me with this movie.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and then he offered to write me a blurb, so that's why there's a Andrew Stanton blurb in the book.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. But
what a nice guy.
Very nice.
To write the letter and to give you the blurb.
I know. And to write me and say, and it's a very flattering, nice letter that's
so cool.
Yeah. It's really cool.
But you got August, you got Coltrane, you got Andrew.
Yeah.
There's a lot to learn there.
Yeah, there is. There is. They're humble people who are not afraid to learn by somebody who is doesn't have the same status that they have.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, though, that they could recognize it, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that all the stuff you're talking about today, whether finding stories in their natural habitat, all that stuff, that's the stuff that they were interested in, too.
Right.
So it's for everyone out there, here's some free advice, right? Go home tonight, start to find this stuff. There's other people that have also found it really helpful, and hopefully you'll do something with it.
Yeah, I hope.
Perfect.
All right, cool.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, sure.
Next time on You Are a Storyteller.
People don't understand. I've worked on movies where people say, I don't get this. I've never gotten this. Two things that bother me. People will sometimes say, when you're working on a movie or something, they go, well, it's just a movie. It's not going to change the world. It's like, you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
You're not paying attention.
Yeah.
Because movies change the world all the time.
Yeah.
Stories change the world all the time.
Thanks for watching You Are a Storyteller. If you have any questions or there's a storytelling topic you want us to cover, leave a comment below or email us at hello@believeagency.com.